What would you do if you were chief of Ferrari and your star signing, Lewis Hamilton, begins to fail from the first race? Do you defend it? Or do you pay attention to Bernie Ecclestone, who already proposes her immediate retirement? Bernie Ecclestone, the architect of the modern show that is today Formula One, did it again. At 94, without any official role but with an intact influence, he released a bomb that shook the foundations of the paddock. In an interview for the Daily Mail, he made clear his position without rodeos. Hamilton is tired. He should stop now. A phrase as short as devastating, especially coming from someone who molded for decades the future of pilots, equipment and races with a single call. The most serious of these statements is not criticism itself, but the context and the moment they are pronounced. We are just in the first part of the 2025 season, and Hamilton crosses the one that may be one of the most difficult beginnings of his career. The British is in command of a car that does not end up obeying him, caught in a slow and frustrating adaptation. But beyond the technical data that are already quite hard on themselves, what really worries is their body language, their attitude in the interviews and gestures that are allowing to glimpse inside and outside the car. After the classification in Hungary, he came to say on the radio that he felt useless. And that word, for someone with 7 world titles, resonates with enormous emotional gravity. Ecclestone's lunge arrives, therefore, at the most vulnerable moment of Hamilton since he debuted in F1. And this is no accident. Bernie has always been a timing teacher. His intervention, strategically launched after one of the worst weekends of the British with Ferrari, has a clear intention: to install in the public debate the real possibility of an anticipated retirement. Not a glorious goodbye at the end of the season, but an immediate withdrawal in the middle of calendar. This has deep implications. First, because it opens the debate within Ferrari, where internal stability has always been fragile. Second, because it puts pressure on Hamilton, which now not only fights the stopwatch, but also against the psychological wear of knowing and tried for every thousandth that loses in front of Leclerc. And third, because it pushes the rest of the paddock to question if this Red Hamilton experiment was, from the beginning, a bet condemned to failure. The fascinating thing about this situation is that Ecclestone, far from being disconnected from the present, demonstrates that he continues to read the F1 pulse better than many. With just a few words, he managed to install a narrative that until recently was unthinkable. What if Hamilton's time has already passed? And meanwhile, in Maranello, Bernie's words not only resonate as a criticism, they resonate as a challenge. Because if something has become clear in Ferrari's history, it is that external noise has the power to accelerate internal decisions. And the clock is already running. While Formula One fights with the idea of a possible early withdrawal of one of its great icons, Bernie Ecclestone did not stop only in the diagnosis. He also offered a very specific prescription: replace Hamilton with new blood. And as if they were choosing future champions in a silent auction, he mentioned with absolute certainty 2 names that, until very recently, they did not include or remotely in Ferrari's radar: Isaac Hadjar and Gabriel Bortolito. For many, those names could sound premature, even reckless. But for Ecclestone, they represent the type of aggressive youth and without fear that a stagnant project can revitalize. The first, Isaac Hadjar, is a starting pilot in Racing Bulls, the Red Bull satellite team. The young Frenchman of just 20 years from the F2 has shown flash of uncommon aggressiveness and maturity for a debutant. Although he starred in an accident during the Tour of Formation in the chaotic Grand Prix of Australia, that does not opaque what has demonstrated in classification and race pace when the car allows it. Hadjar is fast, blunt, and he is not afraid to throw duels with veterans on track. What he lost with that error in Melbourne has compensated it with gross speed, especially in technical paths where he has even surprised his own team. It is the type of pilot that, despite the ups and downs, offers clear signs that it has the champion factor that only a few possess. The second name, Gabriel Bortolito, represents another rookie profile: the brain which optimizes every opportunity without risking more than the account. His step to Sauber was a risky bet in terms of media visibility, but in the current context, his silent but efficient performance begins to attract attention. Bortolito is methodical, precise, and in adverse conditions it has proven to be more consistent than several pilots with years in the category. From the paddock, many compare it with a young Sergio Perez in his early days in Sauber. Perhaps not the louder, but he who adds points when others fail. And that quality, in an environment like Ferrari where each result is measured with magnifying glass, is an invaluable asset. The choice of these 2 names by Ecclestone is no accident. Both have characteristics that, in their opinion, are better aligned with the demands of the present: rapid reflexes, adaptation capacity, and hunger for results. But there is also a deeper subtext. Bernie, with his clinical eye to detect talent, seems to suggest that Ferrari does not need another media figure, but pilots who arrive without pressure, without glorious past to protect, willing to build a new stage from scratch. In addition, by specifically mentioning Hadjar as someone who would steal from racing bulls, he is raising more than a personal opinion. He is hinting that Ferrari should act with audacity, even if that means interrupting the natural ecosystem of Red Bull's development. A gesture that, by the way, would be a declaration of symbolic war between two historically confronted structures. On the other hand, the inclusion of Bortolito also opens an interesting reading. It is not directly linked to a top academy such as Red Bull or Mercedes, which makes it a more accessible piece for equipment such as Ferrari if they decided to make an aggressive movement. In addition, their low noise and high efficiency profile reminds pilots who have worked very well in pressure contexts, such as Kimi Räikkönen or even Felipe Massa in their years of consolidation. By proposing to these two names in the same speech in which the withdrawal of Hamilton suggests, Ecclestone launches a proposal with political, technical, and emotional weight. Not only is he saying that it is time to close a chapter, he is suggesting exactly who the next one should be written. And that detail, coming from who dominated the threads of F1 for decades, is not an innocent comment. It is an instruction disguised as an opinion. Talking about Lewis Hamilton's decline in Ferrari is not just looking at statistics. It is to observe in real time the disconnection between one of the most successful pilots in history and an environment that, far from enhancing it, seems to slowly drain their competitive capacity. What began as a historical signing, almost poetic, the 7-time champion with the rampant Cavallino, today translates into a story full of frustrations, doubts, and a disconcerting lack of synergy between pilot and machine. And the most worrying thing is that, for the first time in his career, Hamilton seems to doubt himself. He does not doubt his talent, but his place in this new Formula One, in this new team, with this new generation that no longer idolizes it, but sees it as part of the past. When Bernie Ecclestone states that Lewis Hamilton should be replaced by a rookie, the proposal may seem at first glance an exaggerated comment or out of place. But if we stop to analyze the current context of Formula One, Ferrari's internal dynamics, and the ultra-competitive nature of sport, a legitimate question arises. Would it really be crazy to dispense with Hamilton in the middle of the season? Recent history shows that in Formula One, the decisions that previously seemed unthinkable today are executed without hesitation. Red Bull has replaced pilots with contracts in force for low yield after just some races. Alpine, Mercedes, and even McLaren have opted for last-minute adjustments when they felt that the original plan did not respond to the reality of track. What was previously considered a betrayal today is interpreted as a strategic maneuver. And in that environment, the figure of Hamilton, however laureate, is not exempt from scrutiny or risk. But there is something even more important than that, the message I would send to the template. If Ferrari decides to continue betting on Hamilton, the engineers, mechanics, and strategists who work every weekend under pressure want to see results. On the other hand, if you give entry to someone like Hadjar or Bortolito, the team can redirect their energy to the future, invest in a growth process without the emotional weight of maintaining a fallen idol. In addition, no immediate replacement can guarantee better results. Hadjar and Bortolito are talented, yes, but they are still newbies. Replacing a heptacampion with a rookie is, in any scenario, a high-risk play. It could go well and revitalize the project, or could sink the season even more and show that the problem was not Hamilton, but the car. Ferrari must ask, do you really have a competitive car, or are you asking miracles to a pilot who simply cannot save what is poorly designed? Another crucial variable is the contract. Although all clauses of the agreement between Ferrari and Hamilton are not known, it can be assumed that there are important financial and sports commitments. Breaking that link could have complex legal and economic consequences. There is also the image factor for Hamilton himself, whose reputation would suffer a severe blow if he is forced to leave in the middle of the season without redemption. But the most important thing in this debate is not whether Ferrari can replace Hamilton, but if he should. And here we enter the strategic field. Ferrari at this time is not fighting for the title. It is at a midpoint, competitive but not dominant. Changing pilot in this scenario is not a desperate attempt to save a championship, but a future construction play. Start the process of adapting a rookie, collect data, adjust driving styles to the current car, all that could be more valuable than continuing to accumulate frustrating weekends with a pilot that does not fit.at the same time. His situation raises a human dilemma. How does a giant retire? How do you decide that you can no longer follow? Hamilton has lived all his life on asphalt, with chronometers, with pressure, with expectations. Starting is not just getting out of the car. It is giving up an identity that has built since I was a child. Therefore, even if I decided to end this stage before planned, it would not be an act of weakness but of brutal honesty. Knowing when to stop is also a form of greatness. But the decision is not yet taken. But if this is the end, then that it is with all the dignity of who transformed Formula One forever. Because beyond trophies, records, and controversies, Lewis Hamilton is and will be one of the few names that define an era. And perhaps, only perhaps, we are about to witness his last years.